House Bill 1168, and I'd like to welcome everybody this afternoon back to the Finance and Tax Committee, and we have Representative Lauser here to present his bill, and so Representative Lauser, just you take it away.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Representative Scott Lauser, District 5 in Minot, and I got to tell you, it is such a relief to pack a room and then find out they're supporting. It's usually the other way around, so I appreciate what we have today. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'd like to just kind of have a conversational presentation about this bill, how we got here, and I'll talk specifics, and then I will offer a couple amendments that I'd like the committee to consider. And from there is probably where you're going to hear others that want to testify. So how we got here, at the end of the 2023 session, we had the property tax bill that had income tax relief in it as well. And over in the House, we also had the bill that the governor vetoed for private school vouchers. And I got up on the floor and opposed it in the original when it was heard on the floor. And then the Senate overrode the veto, the House did not. And I said at the time, I'm not just speaking against this idea, but I will present an idea after we leave. And so in June of 2023, I started working on the concept that ultimately is what you have before you today. And at that time, I was actually talking to who became the sponsor of Measure 4. By December of 23, I had a bill draft at Legislative Council. And of course, by then, the signature process was gaining steam, and it looked like they were going to gather enough signatures to get on the ballot. They had 1 year to do it. In February of 2024, so a little over a year ago, I went public with the first draft of what is now 1168. At that time, the bill was a full 60 mil buyout of the K-12 education mills that the state mandates for all property types. And if I recall, the fiscal note estimate was either 757 million or 787. It was a big number, under $800 million. And as I introduced that to the public, shortly after I emailed it to every legislator, I announced a candidacy for the school board in Minot. And so this became a topic that was front and center, not just for my campaign, but for the voters of North Dakota as we were going through calendar year 2024. As everybody knows, the estimate for Measure 4 would have been slightly over $3 billion. And a lot of the discussion that I heard was, that's too much money. We can't afford that. So I felt a little bit better about bringing something forward that was under $800 million, but it's still a lot of money for the legislature to consider. So over the summer and the fall, I went on a presentation and listening tour across the state. And every single time that I took a question, the first question was, are you doing this to block Measure 4? And my frustration grew, although I knew the question was coming, because I made it clear that this will only be presented if Measure 4 fails. And I think people were saying, well, if Measure 4 fails, you just won't do this. And so for what felt like a year, but it was really a half a year, those were the first questions that I received across the state. But as those presentations and discussions were happening, I was talking to, whether it was taxpayers, I was talking to people in the real estate industry where I serve, been there for almost 30 years. I was looking at transactions that were happening and the discussion people were having in buying and selling real estate in North Dakota. As a candidate and successful candidate for school board, the school board budget became an issue that we were looking at. In my school district, we're operating in a budget deficit right now. So property tax that funds school districts was extremely important. And of course, serving in the legislature now for 8 sessions. So what you have before you is actually version 8. You would think that after all that time, version 1 or 2 or 3 would be what we're presenting. Version 8 is where we are, and we're not done yet because you'll see some amendments. But we're at version 8 knowing that coming into session and even on this near 40th day, this is still the top issue that our voters are talking about, that North Dakota is talking about property tax relief and reform. So as we got into session, I learned about other bills. I expected there would be other bills. And hearing from so many of our colleagues that the cost of that bill was too high, I introduced the bill to have a 60 mil buyout for residential property only. And I want to clarify why I say 60 mil buyout, because the state mandates those 60 mils. And residential property as opposed to primary residence, I want to make this crystal clear to anybody that's listening. Residential property, commercial property, and ag property are types of property in North Dakota. Primary residence is a use of a type of property. It's not a category, it's a use of a type of property. It can change. Your intent to use the property can change throughout the year, or your ownership, whether it's primary residence, second home, or you hold it as an investment property for rental purposes. Now, going back in time, the state mandated 185 mils for K-12 education. The state of North Dakota told the local school districts, you will levy 185 mils to pay for education. Over time, we've got that down to 60. When we mandate the number of mills and the property value increases rapidly, we end up in a situation where the local district can't levy all of those mills with what was a 12% cap in the school districts at that. Actually, it kind of still exists, but it's been sent over to you from the House. So we ended up with what's called transition minimums. And we created that mess in the legislature about 12 years ago. And for about 7 years, we have been paying to get out of that malaise that we created. This is the session that we should get out where everybody is able to levy the full 60 mils because their valuations didn't skyrocket and offset. So I want to come back to that in a bit. If this bill were to pass at 60 mils, now recognize it's at 10 right now. If this were to pass at 60 mils, going forward, that funding would just be included in the per pupil payment that we do back to school districts, currently a little over $11,000. So we don't have to go back and recreate the funding formula. It already exists. Now, as the bill was presented to House Finance and Tax, they heard it. And it took a couple weeks because I believe the chairman said they had between 40 and 50 property tax bills to listen to. And as your committee knows, you can't just pick a couple and run with it because you got to hear all the ideas. So it took a few weeks. And in that time, I brought back an amendment, which the committee accepted on a voice vote unanimously, to take the 60 mils to 30 mils for all property types. So the 60 mils was approximately $300 million. The 30 mils for all property types away from residential to include commercial and ag is about 320 million. So for every mill that we buy, a mill from the state's perspective is worth $12 million. So the 10 mills is 120 million. So the committee, many of you have probably been up in the committee room where House Finance and Tax meets. They accepted the 30 mils for all property types unanimously. And I sat by the door and listened to the vote. And when I got up to go back to committee, I wasn't 5 seconds out of the room walking down the hallway, and there was a motion to amend it down to 10. And then they had the discussion. And so, legislature happened, and we've got a 10 mil buy down now instead of the buyout. So you have before you the property tax relief in the bill is 10 mils. I want to touch on the caps on the other side, the reform. What you have before you is 3% cap on the portion of the political subdivisions budget that is derived from property tax. That was a placeholder from the start. I picked it out of thin air at 3% a year and 4 months ago. It was just a number to discuss the concept of caps. So the school districts are excluded because they're in a different part of code and they have their own levy requirement that we mandate. The caps are for all the other political subs at 3%. What this bill would do as in its current form is allow for voter approval for an additional levy authority. It must be at a general or a primary election. I did have in the language a special election at a supermajority vote of 60%. The special election was amended out in the House Appropriations Committee and sent on to the House floor. I think it's probably fair to not have a supermajority if they are at a general or a primary election, because the trade-off has always been, if you can have a special election, you need a higher threshold. So I think it would make sense, and I'd leave it up to the committee to discuss that, to amend the bill to have that be a simple majority if we leave it at a primary or a general election. And the carry forward unused cap space, think about a baseball team having unused salary space to be able to sign that free agent the next year. The carry forward unused cap space in this bill is 1 year. I would go section by section if you want me to, but I gave a legislative council scenario or synopsis that I passed out, and I also have a section by section breakdown. But I want to address why this bill took on the property tax relief, which is what people are thinking about, in the form of the mill buyout, rather than what we started doing with the tax credit last session. I mentioned property. Residential property is a type. Primary residence is a use. And I had concerns drafting this bill about prorations of the credit. I had concerns that we addressed, actually, Mr. Chairman, I think it was your bill, that we addressed the word individual versus person. So trusts were not included. We had to fix that coming in. We're not going to get it perfect each time. We're going to try. I had a big concern about how to reapply every year if the use of that property changes. Should the property owner have to ask for the tax relief that we're providing them every year based on their use of their own property? And what happens if we provided a credit and somebody closed in March on the sale of their property versus November? Does the credit carry? Did the previous owner have a credit? Does the new owner get a credit when they buy a property and use it as their primary residence in July when the seller didn't have it? I couldn't square how to make all of that work. And in particular, from handling escrow from a real estate perspective. Here's my biggest concern with why I did not go down that road. I think this is crucial to know from a real estate perspective in North Dakota. If we don't take the credit to its logical end of providing the credit equal to the tax liability that the property owner faces at all levels, we are going to disproportionately affect the lower end market, the entry level real estate market. And there's proof of it right now. About 4 years ago, everybody that was involved in real estate either refinanced their property or they purchased when the interest rates were 2.5% or 3% for a 30-year mortgage. And all these years later, we're finding people that are saying, I'm not going to sell my entry level first home to move up to the next property, because when I do that, my interest rate is going to go from 2.5% or 3% to 7%, and I have to pay more for the property. My cost of home ownership is going to increase dramatically. So I'm going to hold on to my home because it's less expensive. If we provide a property tax credit that offsets the tax liability, we are going to double down on taking off the market entry-level properties for renters to purchase and enter into the market. And I'm not saying this from a real estate sales broker perspective. It's a fact that a strong real estate market leads to a strong economy. I have a real concern that not only are we going to restrict the inventory, but the few properties that will be left in all of our markets, the price is going to go up. And just for the information of the committee, a 1% change in the 30-year interest rate on a mortgage affects your ability to borrow by 10%. So when you go in and qualify for a mortgage and your lender says you can afford $200,000 at today's interest rates of 6%, if the rate drops to 5%, your ability with no other change went up to $220,000. and the opposite happens when the rates go up. So I want to be very careful that we don't restrict the entry level opportunity and housing market in North Dakota. I saw a statistic last week, and this is from the Federal Reserve Board, and this one stunned me, and I have every reason to believe this is true. The average net worth of a homeowner in the United States is $396,000. The average net worth of a renter is $10,400. That's nearly 41 times difference. We want people to own homes in North Dakota. We want to incentivize home ownership. I don't want us to disincentivize unnecessarily the entry-level market. And I have another concern, and I'll just leave and I'll move into further support of this bill about why I did not want to take this bill down the road of credits. Somebody is going to forget to apply for the credit. In fact, I was told that 3 of my House colleagues didn't apply for or didn't submit their campaign finance statements online after being notified multiple times, missed the deadline. We are all going to have constituents that forget, and they're going to call us and say, where's my credit? So I have those concerns. I'm not saying not to do it. I just have those concerns with regard to this bill. It's crucial that we look at property tax relief as giving the relief to the property and let the property owner derive the relief because the property had a lower tax assessment. So what this bill does in most markets at 30 mils is somewhere between 16 and 25% relief. If we were to do the full 60 mils, it is somewhere between 25 and up to 50% property tax relief for our residents, our citizens of North Dakota. I shouldn't have said even that, for property owners of North Dakota, because it's for all property types. All property types, commercial, ag, and residential, and for all property owners in state and out of state. So we are incentivizing out of state purchase of real estate into North Dakota as a business friendly state. It also leaves some taxation for the local political subs, including the school districts. The school districts are left with the ability to levy an additional 10 mils that we authorize for their general fund and up to 12 mils for special funds. They also have the ability to ask their voters for a building fund up to 20 mils and a bond to build a new school if the voters so choose with a 60% supermajority. So this covers everybody, all property owners, and it's on the property, not incumbent upon the property owner to ask for the relief. So we get through almost 2 months in the legislature, and I'm hearing from people saying, yeah, but what about? This isn't perfect. Have you considered? What if you did? And it takes me back to Measure 4 because every single person that I talked to that voted no on Measure 4 without fail said, yeah, but, or except you better. I'll vote no, but. And it was always, there has to be substantial relief and reform in this legislative session. To a person said that. Nobody said I'm voting no on Measure 4 because I like my taxes and I want to keep them where they're at. Every single person I talked to, and it was a lot because I was campaigning for school board and I was publicly discussing this measure or this bill. Everybody said if they voted for Measure 4, voted against Measure 4, there was a caveat. So here we are 2 months later, and I've got a bunch of friends here saying, I want to be heard. And I said, I thought you were, but maybe you haven't been. So I got a group together, a work group, and it was, as you would expect, the Association of Counties, the League of Cities, the farm groups, the education groups, and said, what do you want this to really look like? And they gave input, and now you have some amendments that I wanted to discuss. The first amendment is simply the 30 mils. So I would ask this committee, well, I'm going to ask you to, put a due pass on the bill, but please amend the bill up to the 30 mils. I'm okay if you amend it up to 60, but please amend it up to 30, and then your committee and the Senate can decide if that's substantial relief and the route that we want to go. But I would ask you amend it up to 30. The other one has a couple things I wanted to talk about. The 6%, the cap that I had at 3 is now 6 in the other amendment, or a consumer price index plus 1 point, whichever of the two numbers is lower as of July 1st. I think it probably should go back to the May 1st in order to handle budgets that they have first hearings on in August. But we have a consumer price index option, and Brent Bogar is going to potentially talk about why one of those consumer price indexes is the best for North Dakota. But you're probably wondering, why'd you go from 3 to 6? If half of your property taxes is education and they're not subject to this cap, and all the other political subs max out at 3%, that's a 1.5% increase on your property taxes. It's not very much. 3% doesn't get you very far when the cost of the insurance plan that we're considering under PERS is 15.2% right now. So I think it makes a little better sense, considering half of your taxes aren't included in this cap, to take that cap a little higher at 6, or a consumer price index as measured by a qualified entity. So that's why I moved it to 6. I hope you're going to hear from Aaron Burst at the Association of Counties regarding the or, whether it's the solid number or a consumer price index. He may suggest the lesser it's better if it's the greater of the two versus the lesser, and maybe address the majority vote as opposed to the supermajority that's currently in the language. You might hear from Matt Gardner from the League of Cities, because the title of one of those amendments, we proposed to exempt any budget that was under $2 million. But as we looked at that, it made more sense to do it based on population. And I think Matt will talk about that. The population of 1,000 people or less would be exempt from the cap. And mathematically, I think that makes sense. And he may have some numbers for you to justify that. I hope you're going to hear from Amy DeCook and Amy Kopus regarding the crucial importance of not capping the school districts. So I'm going to do algebra. If your assessment is A and you multiply it times the mills, which is B, your end result is your tax liability. So your assessment times your mills is your tax liability. If we cap the tax liability for school districts at 3 or 6 or some number, and your assessed value it increases by more than that cap, and we've mandated the levy, the B, we're short money, because the school district cannot charge more than what the cap is, and they don't do the assessment. The assessment is the market. So the market went up, and so they may only be able to levy 50 mills. That's where the state comes in and has to backfill what the school district is short. That's what I mean by transition minimums that we just got out of. I hope you get an example from West Fargo, because they might have the best, most glaring example of how over a couple of years this could cost the legislature by putting caps on school districts and mandating the mills tens of millions of dollars. I saw an example of $14 million. We're going to have to come in and backfill that. And that's what we just got out of doing this session. You might hear from the farm groups, because they're getting relief, and they weren't being listened to or being offered tax relief. But when we're buying down the mills or buying out the mills, it's everybody, and they too are getting relief. You also have in your testimony and laws, the chairman of the Measure 4 committee that submitted testimony. I wanted to make sure that got seen, because sometimes those submissions get missed depending on how many are there. So I wanted to point that out. I would ask the committee, outside of what we've talked about, if you work on this over time and you amend it, potentially the amendments you might be thinking about have already been considered. And so maybe reach out and say, what if we did this? What would be the effect of the bill? I'll give you an honest answer. I don't want to hide anything here, but I want to be careful that we don't screw up the dynamics of the bill. And I might say this was not included for good reason. I'll explain what it was. I think this bill is complementary, and it's not competing with other bills that the House passed to the Senate. I believe there's been substantial vetting on this bill. You see version 8. And so in summary, I would say that the buyouts work. We're going to hear an example, I hope, of the buyout that we did for county social services, 20 mills. It kept taxes low all these years later. I think it's easy, almost too easy to understand. It applies to the property and it's permanent. I haven't mentioned it satisfies the constitutional question of the state providing free education for K-12 if we do the whole 60 mills. This does maintain local control and has a relief valve if needed. And if you only did the 30 mills and the Senate passed that part of the bill, the 30 mills, I promise if I'm back in the legislature, it's my intent to introduce the other 30 mills next session at a 6% of property appreciation rate. I think the cost of 30 mills next session will be $400 million. And whatever issues we have to fix that we put in the century code for caps, that'll go into that bill as well. But we need to see how this works for 2 years before we know what issues we have. The House passed you 3 major property tax bills, and it wasn't just throw it in the Senate's lap and let's see how that works. I don't think that's what the Senate would do to us. I think everybody saw merit in these bills, and we gave you 3 good products to consider, and maybe they go into one. But I wouldn't be here advocating for this if I didn't think this is the right way to go. And I appreciate all the work everybody's put in. But I'd say, please listen to our constituents and provide substantial property tax relief and reform. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd answer questions.
Thank you, Representative Lauser. Do we have questions from members of the committee? Senator Rummel.
Thank you, Chairman Weber. Representative Lauser, I certainly want to compliment you on all the work that you've done on 1168. I can't imagine all the meetings that you had. If you would bear with me, I have several questions, if it would be acceptable
Proceed.
to the chairman. Kind of the first one I would like to do is talk about who's getting the relief. Now, whether you're at 10, 30, or 60 mills out, it doesn't matter. You can give me any breakdown. What I'm interested in is the 4 property classifications, and then how much is in state and how much is out of state. Would you have access to any of those numbers?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we can get the numbers as to the breakdown of residential versus commercial versus ag. I can certainly get that because those are category types already. I don't know that I could find out of state versus in state. But to answer the question, everybody that owns a property would get relief, whether it's 10 mills, 30 mills, or 60. It's all property classifications. So all property would have, and we did this before. We were at, as I mentioned, 185 mills down to 60. Now, the value of a mill has gone way up.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't feel like the relief has happened at the local level.
Right.
So yeah, I'll try to find that for you.
Okay. The number of your amendments that you have in front of us, it has a $2 million budget for those other political subs. Do you know how many taxing districts have a budget of less than 2 million?
Is Matt here? Somebody does.
So they'll, okay.
And I say that because he broke it down on the budget number and also the population. And then there was a bit of a natural break, and he's got every community. So from a city standpoint, he's got those numbers.
So why was the break at 2 million then? There was
Yeah.
logic behind that?
There was, when this was originally brought up, there's a part of the century code that triggers specific audits of a $2 million budget.
Mhm.
And so we had language elsewhere, and we just thought maybe that would work. But after looking at it, it made more sense on a population than a budget.
Okay. There's no reference in here to the base year. Now, when we have political subs that are growing or declining, of course, they're all used to working with their base year maximum mill levy worksheet. You have no reference to this whatsoever. So that's completely out?
It would be the prior year's budget that was derived from property tax, and it excludes the abatements, the new construction, everything that wasn't on that current year does not carry forward for the purpose of the cap until the following year. So if you bring on $5 million worth of taxable residential real estate because of new construction, that's not included in the base to calculate until the following year.
So you're looking back just 1 year?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Currently, if I understand you correctly there, the worksheet for the maximum mill levy does take into consideration new growth, new property, and abatements also. So yours is also doing that, or the abatements and the new growth?
Correct. We're making sure that new growth that happened in that calendar year is not counted as the base for the following year for the purposes of the cap, of the 3% or 6% cap.
Okay. So there's no touch here on homestead tax credit or the
Right.
renter's credit. Tell us your thinking along those ways.
Well, as far as the homestead tax credit, that exists. The disabled veterans tax credit exists. It's not taking it away. It's silent, so those would continue on other bills. As far as the renter's credit, I've always struggled with providing within property tax relief a credit to somebody that didn't pay property tax. Now, somebody could argue, well, the renters pay the tax, but that has to be stipulated in the lease. And the liability for the tax liability as drawn out for the renter, should they then be able to ask for the credit. But I did not address the renter's credit in this bill at all.
Okay.
None of the credits were addressed.
On the caps, the consumer price index, whether you look at CPIU or any of the others, I'm sure we'll learn about that shortly. But the CPI that I usually refer to as the urban users, so CPIU, last 10 years, we've averaged 3.3% over the 10-year time period. So what I'm getting at is, why did you select 6% CPI plus 1 to a max of 6, a minimum of 2? Is that how that reads?
No, it would be the lesser of the two, whichever, as it's drafted. Now, I think if I were on the other side advocating for this from a county or city standpoint, I'd say give me the greater of the two. But Brent, well, there's multiple CPIs.
Right.
And so I think he's going to have something that's more specific to our markets. But the argument would be, as opposed to doing 3, move it to 6, or the CPI plus 1, maybe it's 2. I wanted the discussion because I heard the CPI discussion late last summer and then it died off. And so we introduced the bill as a placeholder. And as we were discussing this and the discussion from the groups that you're about to hear from with their input, they said, we really wish you would have included this. And I said, well, it sounds like there's still time. We've got a warm and welcoming Senate committee that would love to hear from you. That's how I put it. I no, honestly, I think you're going to hear some good ideas. This has to be a collaborative effort because many of these people that are here are the ones that have to implement what we pass.
So with the transitional minimums, you're saying right now we have all the school districts at 60 mils? Are they all there?
I think we will be after this session. We will have paid off the shortfall, and everybody should be there this year. But if I remember right, there was, I can't remember. We had in one of the budgets the final payoff of those transition minimums that get us up to everybody at 6. Now, to be clear, what Senator's referring to is when a property, we put a arbitrary 12% cap on growth in school districts, because that was a lot of growth in a school district, real estate wise, oil country in West Fargo primarily. And so when property values were skyrocketing by 20%, we didn't want to still levy those 60 mills and mandate that. So we only allowed them to go up by 12%. And when they were short, the state backfilled, and we did it for 7 years, and we're out of it now with this final appropriation that will eventually come out of this assembly.
You certainly explained it well that we're trying to avoid that going forward, with the formula the way it works. On the original, without the amendments in here, and I'm sure it's going to work the same way, but you're just offsetting the deduct by the amount that we actually are at. So if we buy down 10, you're doing a 50 deduct on the formula. Do you follow?
Yep. So that would be on the formula. The local obligation or the local contribution would be deducted based on the value of those mills locally. So it would be a 50. So there'd be a 50 mil if it stayed at 10. The local school district would levy those 50 mills, and that would be included in the formula, the funding formula, and the per pupil payment when the money goes back to the district.
So at 30-30, if you're going the other way?
Yeah,
I mean,
it'd be the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Or 60-0.
Okay, so 60-0 would take that obligation out altogether.
Right.
And now, every future legislature, we would just be increasing the per pupil payment by a number. And I'm gonna make a pitch to the committee now. That number would be relative to the success of the Common Schools Trust Fund and the interest that's being kicked off the Common Schools Trust Fund. I would love long-term, should be a goal of our legislative assembly, to have the per pupil payment fully covered by the interest that's paid off in the Common Schools Trust Fund and move it away from the general fund someday.
Is the Common Schools Trust Fund even large enough to do that? It's generating 500
No,
million.
not yet,
Yeah.
but we can get there.
What would it take? What do you think it would take to?
Remember, I don't know if I said I think it's implied there's smarter people in the room, and Brent has run some scenarios to tell us what that might look like. Now, that's outside of this bill, but the same concept applies. We have enough money kicked off the Common Schools Trust Fund this session to do a 4 and a 4 increase.
My last question, I'm sure you're glad to hear that.
No, I like this. I want to commend the work you've done too, by the way. So
Is what do you think is substantial enough to make sure that we don't have another Measure 4? What's your number?
my number is 60 mils on this bill. And I think we can do 60 mils and a tax credit in another bill. That's substantial, but that's the legacy that we can leave here. Anything short of about 25% full sustainable property tax relief, I think we have failed. The 60 mils is what we should do. 30 mils is what we might do, with an absolute obligation to do the other 30 at a higher cost in 2 years. So you've got an amendment before you at 30. I think it should be 60.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Representative Lauser.
Mr.
Thank you
Chairman,
very
can I
much.
stay and listen to what my friends say?
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, those wishing to testify in favor of House Bill 1168, come on up to the podium.
Sure, I'll step up first and answer questions.
Excuse me there, Brett. If there's some legislators there that might want to testify, yeah, we generally give the legislators the opportunity so that they can get back to what they're at. So Representative Toman, welcome back to the committee. You know, does Representative Headland, was he planning to testify at all? Do you know?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the record, Nathan Toman, representing District 34 in Mandan, here to support 1168 and the amendments as presented by Representative Lauser. I believe it was 30 mils that he was requesting. As before you previously on 1474, which I know that you guys had just defeated in the Senate floor. My belief is that with the original 1168 on all classifications of property, or with the 30 mils and the original 1474, would have provided the most relief and reform for the North Dakota taxpayer. So 1474 would have stopped, not the study, but the original 1474 would have stopped taxing of unrealized gains on an individual's property, and then to mitigate the potential tax raise on a low value property that I mentioned to this committee prior. 1168 with 30 mils or 60 mils would probably have done that most likely in all circumstances. And so I'm here to stand and offer my support. To answer one of the questions previously, I could sort of hear out there about out-of-state property owners. I mean, my response to that would be, well, who built the legacy fund? That would be mineral rights owners that potentially would be out of state, and the companies that came and built that legacy fund for us. So they have been paying taxes. And I don't think that this would be disparate to apply to all property owners. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will offer my support and encourage a due pass and furthering of this, and stand for questions.
Any questions for Representative Toman? Okay, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, committee.
Anybody willing to testify in favor of 1168?
What else is out there, I guess? Chairman Weber's, members of the committee, my name is Brent Bogart for the record, just more providing supporting information that Representative Lauser shared regarding the indexes. And I can also answer the question on a rough number for the senator regarding the Common Schools Trust Fund. So many of you know I've done a lot of work on numbers throughout with the legislature over the last decade or so. And when I think of indexing of stuff, Senator Rummel referenced CPI, and I know that's what's in the amendment. One of the concerns that I've always had with CPI, having been in municipal government, is those are consumer goods. Those don't cover your construction, which is a large portion of what municipal infrastructure or budgets really are based on. And so in doing some research, there are a number of different indexes out there. There's what's called the PPI, or the Producer Price Index. There's the CPI, and then there's a construction cost index as well that's available. And so I would encourage the committee to look at some of these other indexes and maybe look at either merging them, or there is one called the Municipal Cost Index that was created by the American City and County magazine. And so that's a organization, and they've created this municipal cost index and kept that up to date since 1978. And it's a merger of all of these different indexes that could be used. And so it takes some of those construction goods and materials into consideration. It takes labor cost as well as the consumer price index. So that's something, and I can share information with the committee in regards to where that's found online and stuff if you would like. So that's the one thing that I wanted to share regarding those indexes, because I think it takes better consideration. And as you know, the CPI is not only, there are regional breakdowns that can be utilized with that as well. So there's a number of ways that we could, in a sense, skin that cat if you're looking to do caps based off of an index. And then to the question regarding the Common Schools Trust Fund, it's rough, you know, I've ran out some scenarios on that, but you know, if you're looking at inflation, the per pupil payment is going up every biennium. We're increasing that, so you've got to try to match that. But we would roughly need to have the Common Schools Trust Fund in that 35 to 40 billion. Right now, it's about 7. So it's a ways to go to get there, but it is not. When you look at the actual oil production forecasts and some of the stuff that is being put out by the industry, it is not inconceivable to be there in the next 15 years or so. So just some information for you and answer any questions you might have for me.
Senator Rummel.
Thank you, Chairman Weber. Just to follow up on, are you suggesting maybe that the construction CPI is, you know, when I look at school district budgets and cities and counties and park districts and everybody else, you know, the construction side of that thing is probably minimal compared to all of their other people costs, because a school district's got 80% of their costs are people benefits. And a lot of those political subs have very high percentages of that. Why would we take into consideration some of these other indexes?
I think looking at some of these other indexes like that municipal cost index and looking how they've broken that down, they use a number of factors within that. They're doing a lot of labor calculations in that inflation factor.
Okay.
That's why I lean towards that versus just like a pure PPI that is looking just like at concrete, because concrete 1 year goes up 20% and then 7%. Well, that's not a good indicator, but
Right.
That's where I like that municipal cost index that looks more at labor as well as some of those materials in the consumer price index as well.
May I continue?
Continue.
On the Common Schools Trust Fund, you were suggesting 35 or 40 billion will cover it in about 15 years. I'm assuming you also inflated the education budget to match it up against that. Would you be able to share that information?
Yeah, I can pull those that data together and share that with the committee. I'm still working on that, but yeah, we built it in both with a variable where we included increases in student enrollment, considering, because that obviously plays into it, as well as the, like, whether it's a 2 and 2 increase every biennium or 3 and 3, actually have that built to be able to use those multiple factors to figure out where that number would be.
Just as a follow-up, what are we short in this biennium that we're going forward with? Common Schools Trust Fund generated X amount. What is our education budget and how far off are we?
Senator Rummel, I'd probably look to the education people on this side to answer that question, but
Okay.
I know general fund is roughly 1.7 billion and common schools is right around 600. So I mean, there's your,
You have quite a gap.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
and they can probably provide more detail on that.
Any other questions for Brent from the members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Well, hello again, Matt Gardner, Executive Director, North Dakota League of Cities. I made a pitch earlier on many things. I'm not going to report any of that or repeat any of it. I think just sort of address the amendments to this bill. The services we provide are really real-time services, whether inflation is at 8% at the time or 1% at the time. I mean, we don't really control those costs. I mean, they're usually just the costs of doing business. And what I provided is a sheet, and Senator Rummel, you've been mentioning the CPIU, this is the Midwest urban, matrix, I guess you can say. So you can see, I highlighted in yellow, and when you look back 2015, it's at a slight decrease, but you look at 2022, it's at 8%, so it's fluctuating all the time. And even the start of 2025 in January, it was 3.4%. So really, I think as the amendment does, CPI plus 1%, we probably prefer a CPI plus 2. And then with the maximum of 6 in there, so even when it's 8%, we're not going to charge that. But we feel like that is a better way to give us some flexibility to meet the needs of the citizens in real time. The legislature meets every couple of years. I mean, we come and speak to you and let you know what our needs are, and we appreciate that. But, we need to provide these services as they're needed. I mean, our councils are meeting at least once a month throughout the year, to make these decisions, on the needs of their citizens. So CPI gives us a little more flexibility. I recently pulled some data on ND Fit, which is a consortium for providing health insurance for political subdivisions. And in this time period, you've seen increases as much as 6% and as low as 3.8%. And those are health insurance increases. We really don't have a say in what those are. I mean, we can control wages, but you really can't control health insurance costs. So there's going to be things that we just can't control that might model more closely to what CPI is at that time. So it's thoughts on CPI using something like that more broadly. And then the other sheet I provided is our population of our cities. And I will tell you, this is from the last census. It gets updated periodically, but, I just want to give you data that's accurate after the last census. And in visiting with Representative Lauser, the bill sponsor, we just, had open conversation about a cap just in general. And one thought that I've had is there a line in the sand where certain size political subdivision, the cap, they should really be exempt. An example I use is Animus. If you do a 3% increase or a cap in Animus on their property tax, that's $800. Well, you distribute the $800 among residents, it's a few dollars a piece. I mean, you double that, you triple that, quadruple it. I mean, you really hit a point where the increases in the caps really aren't impacting property owners at a certain level. Just seen Representative Lauser in the hallway, and where I think the start of that amendment was from is $2 million with the state auditor's office. If you're a political subdivision and your revenues are under $2 million a year, you do a financial review. If they're over 2 million, then you do an audit. So that was something that came to mind. But in visiting with cities and individuals on that, that's probably not workable. I feel like if we're going to look at a way of certain size communities that, we probably don't need to cap because, it's minuscule, it's de minimis. I think population is the way to look. Representative Lauser brought up 1,000. So if you look at Belfield, 996, 3% cap would be $6,000. So by the time you distribute that to citizens, that's probably de minimis, but you could even get into the other side, like Horace down or Grafton, things like that. So I think we should have a good conversation about, how do we want to impact these small political subdivisions? And, what's the ultimate goal of the legislature? I think you could say that, if you're living in small rural North Dakota, you may not be complaining about your property tax. So I think that's a conversation worth having. But I will say, for the record, from a League of Cities, supporting a cap, we don't necessarily do. I mean, we think that those local decision makers, are meeting monthly, and respond to the needs of the citizens. But we do understand the position the legislature's in, and we want to, work together on figuring out what that solution is. So I think kind of a mix here of providing a CPI with a plus, up or down percentage, with a cap or with a maximum, I think gives the flexibility that communities need. And then maybe we should look at some position of small political subdivisions, maybe fire districts, ambulance districts that, this cap is not intended for. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll answer any questions.
Thank you, Matt. Questions from members of the committee? Senator Rummel.
Thank you, Chairman Weber. Matt, just a couple of questions. I know you provided the CPIU here for 10 years. What would be interesting is to lay any of your cities or all of your cities next to what did they actually do during this time period? What are the actual percentage of increases that happened?
So-
And if you could do that, my second question on your population, all political subdivisions don't have population numbers that we could even get to.
Yep.
So the political subs that you pulled out there, how would you see that working? Cities, I understand you have that, but all of the rural fire protection districts, ambulance districts, hospital districts, all of them are going to be capped here. Park districts don't have populations that I know of. How would you see that working?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rommel, so 2 questions. So we have worked with some communities and they have laid their budgets on what you see here. And I'll tell you, a lot of red. You do a kind of a CPI +2, a fair amount of red, but some years in the black. I mean, I'll tell you, with a CPI +2 index, that's still going to pinch a lot of communities, but we have done some of that. We don't have the budget data for every city out there, but we've taken a handful of them and worked through a worksheet and put that information together. So yeah, we can share some of that, obviously.
Okay.
So I would say that it's it would be painful, a straight 3%. CPI, there's a little more wiggle room, looks a little better, but it's still not perfect. As far as, we select population, I think park districts, they're within the boundaries of municipalities, so I think that works. But you're right, fire districts, ambulance districts, I mean, they do have boundaries, I mean, there could be a way to provide what that is, how many people, how many residents are in those boundaries. I just don't know what data we have available to us.
Right.
And I did start with a dollar figure, maybe that is the right way to go. That could be, there'd be some challenges on what that number is. Is that your budget? Is your revenue side? Is it the expense side? I think deciding what that is, but I think there's got to be some metric that we can utilize to figure out the right position for this.
If I can continue one last.
Continue.
If we did it on dollars, how many of these would be under 2 million? It was indicated earlier that you had that information.
Yes, and I did not print it off for you today, but I would say you may pick up a half dozen more above that 1,000 population. And that's a little different. I mean, if you're out west and you're receiving GPT payments, you're probably have a little more revenue coming in. So the fluctuation is a little bit different, but I would say if you look at 1,200, 1,300 population, that would be a good tentative line. It's not perfect, but somewhere in there.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Matt? Seeing none, thank you.
Yes,
Next.
good.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Robert Wilson. I am the county administrator in Cass County, and I am testifying in favor of the bill. And I also want to address the committee on both this bill and the overall concept of legislation related to property caps on local government. My comments follow a resolution that was passed unanimously by the Cass County Commission last week on March 5th. Before addressing the caps related legislation, let me make it clear that Cass County supports legislative efforts to expand primary residence property tax relief to taxpayers in North Dakota. Those of you who work with the Cass County Board know them to be a pragmatic and fiscally conservative commission with a history of making wise spending decisions and a commitment to being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. The average residential property in Cass County increased in value from $244,000 in 2019 to $317,000 in 2023, yet the corresponding average county residential tax only increased by $20 per year over those 5 years. I think it's important to speak directly to a recent suggestion that Cass County is holding reserves in excess of $100 million. This is not true. Cass County ended 2023 with an audited general fund balance of $26.9 million. If requested, we will provide the 2024 audited general fund balance as soon as that audit is complete. Cass County has the utmost respect for the difficult job you have this session with respect to property tax caps, but the county board also has a difficult job that doesn't always fit nicely into a 3% plus growth box. We're a growing community, and providing adequate public safety demands we build a fully staffed 192 bed addition onto our jail. Had it not been for federal ARPA funds providing for that project with a 3% tax cap and a 4-year opt-out would have been next to impossible. Just last month, we displaced our county information technology office so we, at our own expense, can add an additional secure courtroom for the East Central Judicial District. Cass County respectfully requests you consider the following resolution as you consider property tax caps. Allow growth to occur at the consumer price index plus 2%, not to exceed 6%, nor less than 2%, and allow political subdivisions to also capture half of their percentage of annual growth in population from the previous year. And I would stand by for any questions that the committee may have.
Senator Rummel.
Thank you, Chairman Weber. Mr. Wilson, if I heard you correctly, you just told us that you represent Cass County and you stated that you would like property tax for primary resident credit only? Did I hear that correctly?
We are supportive of property tax relief that the legislature is considering. I'm not looking to limit your actions, your deliberations on that.
Oh, I misunderstood you. I thought you did say just primary resident credit. With your carryover 26.9 million, since you brought it up, what is your usual carryover to be able to function in your particular county?
I know from a percentage, we have county policy that we attempt to, the goal is between 18 and 25%. And I'm not an accountant, but those percentages are derived from GASB recommendations. And so that's the recommendation. Historically, I can get that information for you. But I believe we've been fairly consistent in that over a number of years. But again, if you'd like specific numbers, I can certainly provide that for you.
I guess I would just be interested to know whether the 26.9% is within the 18 to 25% goal that you have.
26.9 million. It is slightly above. I think we're at about 28 to 29%. So we're slightly above our policy targets, but we also have some major projects in the works right now this year, capital projects, and expect that percentage will be coming back in line with policy shortly.
If I may continue, the CPI cap that you were just talking about was, I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. It was, you stated 1/2 of the growth from the previous year with a CPI +2, max of 6, floor 2, but 1/2 of the growth.
Correct. Correct.
May I ask what your thinking is there? I don't understand that. Why 1/2 of the growth?
The thought there is certainly we are a growing county. We have a number of different growing entities, other local subdivisions, so local governments within the county. That was an attempt to recognize the pressures for some of the fast growing jurisdictions, both Cass County and some of the other local subdivisions in Cass County as well.
House Bill 1168 though allows 100% of the new growth. So you're satisfied with 1/2.
Well,
just wanna-
we're looking at the we're trying to bring options to the table and looking at and thought the resolution was an option that the commission, and it should be clear, this is something that was approved by the commission. I'm bringing forward from the commission, was a way to within a structure of caps that would allow us to be able to operate in some of the high inflation times where we will see cost increases from year to year that that we don't have any control on and need to meet.
One last question with abatements. Are you abating any property from property taxes? Do you grant any abatements?
There are, there's a number of different economic incentives that the county considers, mostly originating at the different municipalities and coming to the county. Strict abatements. I'm not aware of that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Robert? Seeing none, thank you.
Good afternoon, Senator Weber, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dr. Amy Kopus. I serve as the Executive Director for the North Dakota Council of Educational Leaders. And as Representative Lauser indicated, he did spend quite a bit of time with my organization. We have a group of superintendents called the Legislative Focus Group, primarily made up of some of our probably the most influential superintendents, many of them superintendents of the year, and to go through his bill. And we addressed the school stuff. And it's interestingly enough, right after the amendment was approved by House Finance and Tax, Representative Hedlund caught me in the cafeteria and he said, "Kopus, are you surprised that happened?" And I said, "Actually, Representative Hedlund, not at all." I said, "This formulation of property tax relief is something we're very familiar with. We know exactly how it works and we know it does work. So I'm not surprised at all that this was something that we felt comfortable with." Now, that being said, let me address a couple things and a couple questions that you guys had. I think I can answer for you. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the caps on schools and why it's important to help you understand why there's still a cap on schools, even though it seems based on perception that we're a little bit different. We are a little bit different. So we're operating on a school funding formula that's on a per pupil model. We are not a municipality that's able to assess specials or fees. In this version of the bill, you'll note that we used to have a 12% cap, and we were the only political sub that used to have a cap such as that. That has been removed. So we have no opportunity for growth. We're now at a hard cap on our mills. So the mills are our cap. So then our opportunity for growth is every time that we get together and we visit as a legislator with the legislature every legislative session, and we have those conversations. with the local caveat of local boards have that small amount of wiggle room with their miscellaneous mills. What are those about? I'll tell you. So we fund the basic pieces of education, and then the 10 mills of educational use are the other things. But then we've got a lot of things that we don't fully fund. For example, transportation is only funded at about 35%. Special education is only funded at about 35%. High-cost students don't get reimbursed until we go 4 times the cost of education, and that's when we start to get reimbursed. So there's a number of things that aren't fully funded. That's why local boards have that wiggle room. Not to mention the fact, and I'm sure Brant will address this, but when you're in a smaller community, if you lose 10 kids, that's a teacher. And that is seriously stuff that we see all the time, a growth of 10 kids, a loss of 10 kids. And so boards need to be able to locally react on a yearly basis and make decisions so that they can make their budget whole. And I will tell you that most all of your school staff, your school superintendents, and your school boards are strong conservatives and are Republicans. And they don't want to raise taxes on their local constituents, so they don't. They keep them as low as they possibly can to fiscally operate their school buildings. Now, we talked a little bit about the walk that we had. So let me take some of you back all the way to 2013. And some of you were around probably till 3 or 4 in the morning, like many of us were that day that we were working on property tax relief through the school funding formula. And one of the things that happened, we went from 110 mills down to 60, is there was a hold harmless provision. And that hold harmless was so that we didn't suddenly do damage to districts and take them from where they were at and drop the floor out from under them, and suddenly they can't operate. So they were under a hold harmless, and that's what created transition minimums and maximums. And it eventually got to the point where 7 years ago, the legislature said, we really need to get everyone on the formula, because we had variations of we had the per pupil payment, but then schools that were getting more than that, it was just vastly different on the basis of where they were at from the hold harmless in 2013. So for 7 years, we've been walking back to this path, and 2025 is our end year. So everybody's back on the formula. And I would really hate to see, there's other property tax bills that have caps in them that have schools included. And what that would do is quickly unravel that. And here's an example. So Levi Bachmeyer's is a business manager from West Fargo, and he sent a spreadsheet today, which I will supply to your clerk, but I just had it in my email. But I'll walk you through. So in the course of only 5 years, West Fargo would go from 60 mills down to 43. So in that last year, that's a $14 million hit in the state. And over 5 years, the state is covering a $40 million extra amount for just one city. And when you start talking about that statewide, it'll happen all over the place. When we were doing this walk, we had schools all over the place that were under 60 mills, everywhere, especially anywhere we had rapid growth. The West Fargos, the Bismarcks, the Bakken area, and that's not done. So it's really imperative. We really feel like it's imperative and it's fiduciarily sound that we hold on to the formula and keep it safe wherever it's at. 60, 30, 0. 0 is great, and I'll tell you why. Do you remember when they bought out the 20 mills of social services? That property tax relief stayed for decades because there's no way for it to get backfilled. When the mills are gone, they're gone forever. So if you get to 0, they're just gone. And schools don't have any way to get access to them. They're gone in law. All we have is the mill authority that's there. So every time you pull these mills down, that authority is gone. So the thought of us backfilling, it's a fallacy. We're unable to. If we don't have an ability to grow and we're capped at our mills and the mills get cut, there's nothing we can do to create any problems for our property taxpayers. That's why mill buy down works. It really does work. Now let's talk a little bit about, you wanted to know about Common Schools Trust Fund. So currently the Common Schools Trust Fund is paying for about 30% of the per pupil payment. The last year, this last biennial budget was about $2.3 billion. The Common Schools Trust Fund covered about 510 million of it, so about 30%. It's looking like a projection of close to 700 million right now, and we're looking at a budget of about 2.4 some odd billion. So look at what you saw. So from the year prior, it had gone up almost $100 million. And now we're skateboarding our way almost to $200 million ahead over this biennium. And it's the natural thing that we saw with the legacy fund. The more money you get in there working for itself, it starts to grow faster and faster. And I'm sure that's where Brent is getting to his point, where in the foreseeable future, in our lifetimes, we may very well see where the cost of education is covered by that fund. And it makes me think about our forefathers and how smart they were to create it, and how smart you guys were in 2015, adding more pieces of revenue, the oil extraction tax and different things to supplement the fund, because it's getting it there quicker. So any other pieces of data that you might need, I can dig them out for you. I can find just about anything, but I think that this answers the questions that you had to this point, and I'd take any others if you have them.
Thank you. Senator Rummel.
Chairman Weber, thank you. Dr. Kopis, I was wondering if you could, just so that we're all on the same page, there's 9 levy limitations that school districts have.
Mhm.
And I'm sure you're aware of all 9 of those. Our taxpayers are going to continue to receive property tax statements with school district levies in them.
Mhm.
Some of them could be pretty substantial. So we know even if we did all 60 buy down, we have 10, we have 12. We have the building fund, we have special reserve fund,
Correct.
we have the safety plan fund if somebody
There's
actually.
only 2 schools that have
2.
ever applied for it, but yeah.
But everybody, these
Everybody
are
could.
available to you. So we are all going to still get a statement. Some may be fairly substantial if you have 10, 12 and all the rest of this, depending on their bond issues.
Mhm.
And I just want to make, I guess my reason in stating that is I don't want to mislead everybody that's listening
Mhm.
and everybody that's very involved in the property tax buy down, that they're not going to get anything from the county with school district levies against them that could be fairly substantial.
Fair, Senator Rummel. And it's not that schools are going away. So I appreciate that question. And this is one thing I'd like to visit about a little bit more, is what that property tax statement looks like. Because I was on the work committee with Senator Cook years ago when we worked to make it a little bit better. And one of the pieces that I think could be done to really put some credit back in the legislature's piece is a narrative of what you have done for property tax relief that doesn't exist on that form. So to show them what your taxes would have been at 60 mils and what it looks like now at 30, and show that gap. We don't currently show that. We don't show what it would have looked like at 110 and what it looked like at 60. And then also I think a breakout on the property tax statement of all of those other mills that you stated that are legislatively they're really a gift from the legislature versus voter approved levies should be 2 separate columns, so that the voters can acknowledge, oh yeah, I voted for that, versus this is the other stuff for operational. Those are just my suggestions that would make a property tax statement much more understandable for, at least for me, when I open mine and I look at it, and mine's significant. I live in Bismarck and I vote yes to new school building just about every year, just like y'all do in West Fargo. But to see that breakout would be really nice. And I think that would also provide an awful lot of long-term credit for the legislature in the process of this buy down. So it's not forgotten.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thanks
How
for your
many
time.
more are here wishing to testify in favor? Okay, again, our goal is to be done here by 4 o'clock or shortly after. So let's, again, try not to repeat each other, but we want to give everybody an opportunity to say their piece. So thank you.
Chairman Weber, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Dr. Paul Stremick, and I represent the North Dakota School Study Council, which is roughly the largest 18 schools in the state. I won't repeat everything. My testimony's been submitted online. I just want to emphasize this bill recognizes the existing caps on school districts and how the caps are intertwined with the school funding formula. The current school funding formula creates equity and adequacy based on a settlement with the state from a lawsuit that was filed. House Bill 1168 is the only bill that currently recognizes and appropriately addresses the cap issue for schools. As Dr. Kopis mentioned, if it's not addressed properly, it could cost millions of dollars for some school districts, and that could be viewed as a state buy down for one district which another district does not receive. Tax relief is an enormous challenge, one that I do not envy the task that you have in front of you, but it's crucial to get it right, especially in regard to school funding. By supporting House Bill 1168, we can move toward a more equitable and sustainable tax structure that meets the needs of our school districts and taxpayers. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Senator Rummel.
Thank you, Chairman Weber. I hate to do this, Dr. Stremick, to you, but in 3 minutes or less, can you tell us about equity and adequacy and where we're going to get in trouble from the lawsuit that was already from years past when we were dealing with that issue? 3 minutes.
Senator or Chairman Weber, Senator Rummel, equity is to make sure everybody has the similar amount of money to spend, and that's really based on the per pupil payment, and that should not change in this. However, that taxpayer equity is to make sure everybody's paying a similar amount. In the current formula, and part of the settlement is everybody would pay at least 60 mils towards public education. And again, it's changed over the years, but that's where we're at. So again, we want an adequate amount, which is the per pupil of payment, and the equity for everybody, including the taxpayers. Less than 3 minutes.
Okay, no other questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Lance Gaby. I'm here on behalf of North Dakota Farmers Union. We spent a good deal of time this morning talking about the background of our position on property tax relief and appreciate the introduction of this bill. I also talked about the share of agriculture property tax across the state. So I won't go through those figures again, but just want to emphasize that we do support the notions in other bills of a property primary residence credit. Certainly we understand the importance of delivering property tax relief, but I think this bill could be a real complement to that with maybe a long-term legacy of buying down the mills. I wasn't aware until this hearing started about the proposal to increase the buy down to 30 mils, but we would certainly support that aspect. We were thinking it could be more of a long-term nature that you, as the legacy fund earnings grow, that could be the funding source for this, and that the buy down over time could continue to grow and offer the future generations the opportunity to have this property tax buy down and continue to support our schools and our education through this property tax relief function. So the notion of that we have is that it could be that potentially the legacy fund could fund something like this for a long term. We talked this morning about materiality and impact of property tax relief. Potentially the property tax relief could be whatever general fund might be available to help support the primary residence credit, and that more of a long-term approach with buy down could be offered to all property classes like this particular bill does. So we see this not as a competition, but as a complement to 1176 that you'll hear later in the month, I think. I guess that's all I really need to say. Just want to emphasize our support for this bill and this approach.
Thank you. Senator Rummel.
Thank you, Chairman Weber. Mr. Gaby, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. The legacy fund earnings is not large enough to cover this. We have 398 million available, and we're already into the general fund to make this happen. So I heard your comment that you're interested in having the legacy fund earnings buy this down.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rowan, my notion was based on the 10 mil buy down at the $120 million range when I prepared these comments, thinking that will grow over time because as a legacy fund grows, so does its earnings. And just like the examples of the Common Schools Trust Fund, I had the honor of overseeing that fund from 2010 to 2018, where we went from paying for 4% of the cost of our primary education to, when I left, about 12%, and I think now it's 24% of the cost of education. So that growth that Brenton has talked about and others prior speakers, in fact, the mechanism that you have defined by statute of the distribution of the legacy fund and how earnings is defined was copied from the Common Schools Trust Fund, which was, in that case, it's 10% of the rolling 5-year average. And this is even a little bit smaller, so there's certainly potential. 7 and 8 is being talked about.
There is a bill to go to 8. but we're at 7 right now.
So understanding that there isn't enough room, I'm only presenting it as when we talk about the potential impact of property tax relief, that we think about the buy down of mills for school funding for all property tax classes that use that legacy to do that, and that the primary residence credit is certainly has impact and will be noticeable by taxpayers, but it might not be as sustainable over the long run. But this could be.
Just so that we're, again, the legacy fund earnings has some other obligations like a bond payment for water and additional property tax relief and the highway distribution fund. So we already have some pretty big commitments out of that fund that I don't believe we can stop at this point in time. Thank you.
Understood. Senator Romo.
Anybody else?
Good afternoon, Chairman Weber and members of the Senate Finance and Taxation Committee. My name is Peril Grossman. It's my privilege to be the Legislative Director for the North Dakota Soybean Growers Association. I appear in support of engrossed House Bill 1168. The association would like to see agricultural property included in the tax relief package passed this session. The association supports House Bill 1168 because it provides relief to primary residential, agricultural, commercial, and centrally assessed property owners. Further, House Bill 1168 would, with some adjustments, would complement House Bill number 1176 if both are enacted. For the reasons stated, the association respectfully asks the Senate Finance and Taxation Committee to give engrossed House Bill 1168 a due pass recommendation. Thank you for your consideration. I would be willing to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Weber and committee. Leslie Snoggle with the North Dakota Corn Growers. I'll keep it short and sweet. We urge your favorable consideration of House Bill 1168 to provide broad-based, equitable, and hopefully sustainable property tax relief. So thanks. I'll take any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Next.
Good afternoon, Chairman Weber and members of the committee. My name is Jade Koski and I represent the North Dakota Stockmen's Association. We rise in support of House Bill 1168, a bill that would readily meld together with other property tax relief proposals you are considering advancing this session. Our organization feels strongly about the need to provide balanced, equitable relief that encompasses each of the property classes and recognizes their respective contributions. House Bill 1168 checks important boxes in our estimation and is worthy of your favorable consideration. Thank you for the opportunity to testify and thank you for your work in the property tax discussion. I will stand
Thank
for any
you.
questions.
Seeing none, next.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm happy to clean up for the Aggies today. I think my position, began about North Dakota Farm Bureau, our position on property tax relief and reform has not changed since this morning. And I would say that NDFB has been a part of these discussions on this bill specifically, and we're happy to be involved in that. We have seen this and testified for this bill and the other two that we're all talking about on the House side, and we're still happy to support this bill on the Senate side. And I guess in the big picture of things, none of these bills, the one that was scheduled for yesterday and the bills today, none of them are exactly perfect for everybody in the room, but we haven't heard any dissent on any of them. And I think that's pretty important to remember, that we haven't heard dissent on the one this morning. We haven't heard dissent on this one this afternoon. And I don't want bills that are not perfect to be the enemy of really good. And since none of the bills are perfect, I don't want the perception of a perfect bill to be the enemy of two other good bills, regardless of which one you want to label with which title. So let's pass all three of them and have a lot to discuss in conference committee so that we can have, conference committee could be a pay-per-view.
We could sell
Thank you, and I am
popcorn, too.
happy to stand for questions, but I do think that is true, that why would we make two of the bills the enemy of another good bill, regardless of which ones you want to label in those titles. So let's pass them all because they all have something to bring to the table and something to negotiate from. And we want to find the best solution, not just take one as the only solution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more? Larry?
Good afternoon, Chairman Weber and committee members. Larry Severs, North Dakota Township Officers Association. NDTOA supports property tax reform and reduction. However, we have concerns with the several bills under consideration in that none of them take into account the unique nature of township government. The residents of a township are not just spectators of the budget process, but are active participants that hold the power of approval over the adopted budget and the resulting tax levy. Each March, townships hold their annual meeting under 58-04. A newspaper notice at least 10 days prior alerts the residents of the meeting, which is in 58-04-01. The Board of Supervisors recommends a budget and submits it for approval. Any resident may move to change the budget or move its approval. The electors then vote on that motion. Thus, the budget submitted to the county for the township is already the product of an election at the township's annual meeting. I'll read from 57-15-19, part of it, township tax levies. The electors of each township have the power at the annual meeting to vote to raise such sums of money for the repair and construction of roads and bridges and for all township charges and necessary expenses as they deem expedient within the limitations prescribed in 57-15-20. The Board of Supervisors of each civil township shall levy annual taxes for the ensuing year as voted at the annual township meeting. And on the next page, I have three optional levies. I won't read them. I'm just going to point out that each one of them has a notice requirement and an election requirement. And that's for the township increased general fund levy, the excess levies in township, and the township levy for emergency purposes. NDTOA concerns are that townships do not utilize a general election for any of their functions. They're all handled through their annual or special meetings. And the electors have already approved the township budget and resulting levy. Township budgets are approved in March. This may not fit with some timelines in these other provisions, other proposals. And townships that levy less than 18 mills may be denied state funding. I would really like to support this measure. I believe with the amendments, it would be very workable for townships. I would note that the exemption for political subdivisions less than 1,000 population would help most townships, and certainly the $2 million limitation would help all the townships deal with this provision. So, Chairman Weber and committee members, thank you for allowing this testimony today. I would urge your favorable consideration of this bill. I would stand for any questions.
Senator Rummel.
Thank you, Chairman Weber. Just for your information, House Bill 1176 has an exemption for up to 18 mills for all townships. If you haven't looked at that, you might want to take a look at that one, because of the three bills, there is nobody else that isolates townships like 1176.
Chairman Weber and Senator Rummel, that only exempts the townships that are under 18 mills.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Larry. Anybody else?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Aaron Burst. I'm with the Association of Counties. Happy to stand up here and support 1168. Don't want to bring extra stuff that I already said this morning. Just a couple of thoughts. I personally want to thank Representative Lauser for sitting down with us, explaining the bill. The only thing I'll bring extra to the table is when you do the 12% buy down that we did about 15 years ago, that doesn't work, where you just give 15% to a county or whatever and say, okay, reduce your mills. If you do, by taking away mill levy authority, that does have a lasting impact. And that was primarily in social services. The counties levied 20 mills for social services. The state took it over and 20 mills is taken away from our authority. So you can't backfill that 20 mills. This has the same concept of taking away the mill levy authority. So there is lasting impact. Now, I know some people will say, well, then county budgets should have never gone up. Well, that's impossible. You're always going to have some, value increase and those kind of things on budgets. But you can actually buy down mills as long as you take away the mill levy authority. It does have a lasting legacy. You can look at our county budgets and you can see when it dropped for the social services and then just slightly goes up. It did make a difference. And I think this bill would do that too. Again, how much and who gets relief, that's out of my lane. That's for this committee and this legislature to decide. But I'm up here to tell you this is workable. We could do it. It would be sustainable in terms of removing that mill levy authority. We also do support 1176 too. And I do believe there are good pieces in all of these pieces of property tax relief. So all I'll say is Linda, Danelle are around all the time. We'd be happy to sit down with anybody. It's impossible to give a full view of all these bills in 2 minutes, but we will sit with anybody who's willing to talk with us.
Thank you. Senator Rummel.
Thank you, Chairman Weber. Just want to make a comment to make sure, again, we're all on the same page. You're right. When we buy mills down, we take that authority away from you. The other side of that is it has to be sustainable for the state of North Dakota to reimburse all those mills going forward forever. And that's the risk that the state has to take, and to make sure that we have the ability to sustain the increased value in all of the mills we bought down already.
Mr. Chairman, 100%. And that's why I'm going to leave what that amount should be, because you're going to have to make that decision of whether that's sustainable. I can't do that. We can give suggestions, but that's big. And again, let's all hope oil stays at $70 and corn too.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Let's step up to the podium. We just have a few minutes left. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Andrea Fennick and I'm with the Greater North Dakota Chamber. And we are here today to support House Bill 1168 in its current form and as amended, if you amended as was mentioned earlier. Our members support equitable, competitive, and consistent tax structure that fosters long-term revenue stability and provides certainty to businesses for sustained growth and investment. And we feel like House Bill 1168 accomplishes that by offering broad property tax relief. Businesses and homeowners alike utilize the services that property taxes provide. And when you're thinking about tax relief, we think it's important to consider all sectors to ensure that tax relief isn't, that you're not creating a tax shift and an unbalanced reliance on a portion of the taxpayers. When you think about centrally assessed and commercial properties combined, they contribute approximately 33% of the total property tax revenues. Homeowners provide approximately 36%. And so, some comments and questions had been made about out-of-state owners and everything else. But I would say that when you think about our local businesses or infrastructure that our businesses are providing, where you're thinking about stores or anything else, we provide value to those communities, and our businesses are also contributing to those communities. So we would urge you to include them in the conversation. We think that House Bill 1168 offers long-term stability. The approach helps ensure that property tax increases and bond issues will not be borne disproportionately by the business community in future years, and that's an issue that has made business community investments in other states less attractive. We would just like to note that we strongly believe that all property tax types should have some tax burden, regardless of the property tax bill that you pass. And then finally, we would just like to briefly say that when you think about caps, we support some sort of mechanism to control increases. We also think that there needs to be flexibility, and we certainly don't have a certain position. We don't think it needs to be one way or another. We would leave that to people that are much more qualified in that area than us. And so with that, we hope that you'll give thoughtful consideration to expanding property tax relief, and I'll stand for any questions. But
Thank
Senator Rummel, if you don't ask me any, you'll get done faster.
Anybody else? Anybody else?
Thank you.
Anybody in a neutral capacity?
Brent Holper, City Administrator for City of Horace. In Horace, we recognize, yes, there's the desire at the legislature level for the relief and reform. We've had that.
Could you
Yep.
talk a little better into the
Yep.
microphone?
Is that
Thanks.
better? Okay. We recognize the need for relief and reform. We see that with our city council every year during tax equalization. We mentioned it on House Bill 1575, that they're frequently looking at, can we have relief on that valuation? And it's a struggle every year. However, we do recognize also, Horace, we are probably an anomaly compared to a lot of other communities within the state. We make, last year, when you look at just single family home construction within the state of North Dakota, based on number of building permits reported, we made up just over 17% of the entire state for single family growth. That's an impressive number. That means a lot of population is coming at us and coming into our metro area. But we also do see that growth is going to slow down in Horace. We recognize that when FM diversion is done, that opens up the ballgame more for single family growth and population growth within the Fargo metro. For Horace, we're not going to be doing nearly as many building permits. And that's where we get the most concern, is when our growth does slow down within the next few years, next 4 years or so, we see that is it's going to be a harder fall, and that we're going to have a bigger funding gap to make up. And with these caps, that's going to be where it's really painful for our community, because then we have to put more pressure on other means to be able to provide services, or we don't flat out provide core services for the community to the level that our residents are expecting. So instead of plowing the street when there's a couple inches of snow, it might be 5, 6 inches. The thresholds are going to be different, and that's going to be more painful in our community there. We had a couple suggestions. We recognize that the likeliness of a cap is reality. We do see that. The CPI +1, the +1 could be +2, could be plus whatever number the legislators, you guys decide. However, keep in mind, the lower that number is, the more painful it's going to be on a community like Horace as we grow. And we're making up a lot of that growth in the state. Like I said, 17% for just single family homes. That adds up a lot. Our concern too is the sustainability long-term. Short-term, it sounds great, but how are the cities and counties going to be able to sustain this every year? If we have to be cutting every year, even with the growth for us, we have growth, we're still going to have to do cuts at a point because we have demands for services that are greater. We're not going to be able to provide that. Once our population slows down for growth, the cuts are going to have to be there still. Counties have to do it too. And one of our biggest concerns is when it comes to the counties, we have a great partnership with Cass County, for example, law enforcement. They contract law enforcement services with many of the other communities around Cass County. It's a service that works well. It helps the sheriff's department out because they have more patrol officers around. And if they have to pull those patrol officers for a situation, they're able to. But at the same time, it helps us by having a local law enforcement presence without having to get a police department. We recognize in Horace, we'll have to do that someday, create one. But with a cap, the reality of being able to do that, it gets tougher and tougher. If the counties have a cap, they were going to have to reevaluate their partnerships every year to determine, okay, does cost share change? Does that put more pressure on the cities? Can they afford it? Are we going to keep doing this or not? Because every year they're going to have to reevaluate that. And in talking with the sheriff for Cass County, Sheriff Jesse Johnner, indicated priorities are going to be for like sheriff's department. Their number one priority is the jail. We recognize that. But when they're short-staffed, they have to make sure they have the coverage at the jail, number one. And contract communities will, our concern is we may have a hit. So I know our solutions aren't perfect. I know a tax bill is not going to be perfect, but we do recognize that a higher percentage of the CPI plus a higher percentage would be helpful. But I can't give you a specific number, because if I give you a number, I know it's not going to be realistic for the rest of the committee here, or for the committee. Population, I said in my written testimony, if we're at population, where the cap supply, say at 10,000, you're hitting still a big chunk of the population of the state with that. You're providing relief still to some degree, or quite a bit still, with the buy down of mills for the schools. But 10,000 does give the growing communities like Horace, for example, because when ours slows down, somebody else is going to pick up. And it won't be us, in 10 years, but it's going to be another community. Somebody else is going to have to be able to tackle that battle. When you start getting to a bigger community though, closer at 10,000 and up, you have to be focusing on your budget, how to diversify it even more. Horace has diversified our budget tremendously. Property tax makes up about 55% of our budget, but we continue to have to look to diversify it so we're not dependent on property tax all the time. When our growth slows down, property tax becomes a bigger player again for a while until it can continue to be diversified. So we keep that in mind, but like I said, that's why I come up, or I suggest the 10,000. It's just because you have to diversify when you get bigger on your budgets. Also, when you're bigger, you have a lot more commercial typically. Unfortunately, in Horace, we don't have that heavy commercial yet. I don't think we ever will have a heavy commercial presence. We'll have more commercial than what we have right now, but we have to have a population to support that commercial. So anyways, I just want to express the concerns. Like I said, we recognize the need for reform and for relief. Relief is probably one of the biggest areas that we hear of every year. So we just wanted to express our concern there. So if you have any questions, I can say an answer.
Thank you, Brent. Yeah, I might ask, I think Senator Rummel has some question, but I do want to ask a question. You've got some more land there that's developed and ready to go. You've been giving, property tax exemptions for new homes, exempting them for a couple of years. You've been doing that a long time. So, Brent, doesn't that just make your problem even worse when you've been doing that? I mean, it seems there's an attraction there that people want to move to Horace. It just seems to me that you make the problem worse by continuing that. So I'm just curious on your thoughts.
The overall impact of the property tax exemption to the city of Horace, like right now, overall, it's a nominal amount when you look at the overall, if somebody's going to build in our community or not. The other thing is competitiveness with our neighbors. What I do believe is with these caps, I think the conversation with our council is going to be pretty darn serious. It has been the last couple of years of, do we continue that abatement or not? I think that's going to get serious, even more serious. And I think there's a greater likeliness that they'll eliminate it, because we're going to need to be looking at every single revenue stream possible, or like eliminating that tax abatement. So
My question is, if doing that so long, I mean, in a way, don't you just dig yourself in a hole even farther by having that policy?
Yeah, it could be looked at many different ways. So you could look at it as, it could be digging yourself a hole a little bit for some, but it could also be, okay, does that person choose to build their home into their community, into our community? Does it provide other resources like sales tax dollars into our community? We do have the property tax, and it's only abatement only is for 2-year period. So it comes off those rolls after 2 years. So
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Brent. Okay, have we heard from everybody? We tried very hard to make sure everybody had a chance to share a few words. And it's 10 after 4, so we didn't do too bad. We're only 10 minutes past 4. So I want to thank all of you for being courteous and respectful. It's a big issue, and we've tried very hard to accommodate everybody here in this hearing. So again, I thank you for your patience and your willingness to answer questions. That's our job, to ask questions as much as we can, because we recognize that at the end of the day, we have to come up with a policy, and certainly this is an important step along the way, and certainly we do have a ways to go. So again, I thank you for your patience. And so I believe then that will conclude the hearing of House Bill 1168. Committee members, I think we've had a big day. We'll be back tomorrow at 9 o'clock. So, sir? Okay. Shame on you. Okay, so we will adjourn until 9 o'clock in the morning.